This is Changemakers with Katie Gore, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
I'm here again with Changemaker Andrea Ponsor, the president and CEO of the Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future, a nonprofit alliance comprising 13 nonprofit affordable housing providers operating across multiple states. Andrea, can you shed some light on some of the goals and projects your organization is undertaking in the realm of financing tools? There has been a notable surge of interest in the low-income housing tax credit in recent months. So how is SAHF actively engaged in that aspect?
Yeah, we absolutely are. So we're advocating for changes, but we actually have another role we play in the space as well. Together with the Low Income Investment Fund, our partners in a syndicator, a small syndicator, the National Affordable Housing Trust, that was actually formed by some SAHF members before SAHF was, as a way to have a mission-driven syndicator that would reinvest proceeds into the sector. And so they've been around for more than 35 years. And really have excelled at creative funds. They've got a partnership with United Healthcare, where we have partnered with them not only to drive that capital investment into the tax credits from United as the investor, but also to make available some funding for catalytic resident services that are designed to improve health outcomes. They've previously done some work around preservation funds, starting to shift the thinking in how investors underwrite Section 8 properties. And in providing guarantees to make those deals go better, and another fund where they're tracking outcomes on properties with resident services. So some pretty innovative thinking in addition to some traditional financing. So that's the sort of practice side of the work. On the policy side of the work, we are, like most others in the space, part of the very large bipartisan tent of folks advocating for the passage of the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, restoration of the 12.5% increase we saw back in 2018, but then also expansion of the 9% credit, as well as many of the technical fixes that exist in that bill. As nonprofits, we're also really committed to the long-term preservation of those tax credit properties for all 30 years or more that they are committed. So we have advocated as well around qualified contracts and closing, narrowing and closing those loopholes, better defining affordability, as well as making clear what the right of first refusal for nonprofits is intended to be, ensuring that properties, developed by nonprofits are able to remain with nonprofits.
When do you think some of those key objectives, like the expansion of the 9% credit and stuff, when do you think that's on the horizon? Like, what's the timeline there?
I am very hopeful. You may have seen the op-ed from Representatives LaHood and Del Bene last week advocating that any tax deal that's passed in this first quarter as we negotiate spending deals should absolutely include housing tax credit provisions. And I think first on the docket would be that 12.5%, as well as fixing the bond test so that we are better able to expand supply in states where bond cap is fully used. That hopefully could happen this year. And I think as we talked about that expanded interest in housing, I think this great bipartisan support, 200 plus co-sponsors, it means that there are windows, but there's got to be just sort of general legislative momentum on the Hill as well.
Well, we lend all of our support to you because this is a major initiative and a great way for the industry to kind of get some more units under the belt, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's our primary vehicle for creating new homes, but I will say it's got to go hand in hand with those rental subsidies for the lowest income people.
Speaking of financing tools, I was impressed to read about Mackenzie Scott's donation to SAHF. Quite a landmark contribution to your organization, so congratulations on that. What exactly is that going to go to, and can you tell us what the long-term strategic plan is for that?
Sure. So the long-term strategic plan is to recognize this is an investment in the good work we've already been doing, and that doesn't even want to do new things, but that will stay committed to the creation of equitable, healthy, and stable homes. So we expect to create for ourselves a source of funding that allows us to continue to advance another sort of collective agreement our members have made, which is our pledge to advance racial equity. It is not time limited, but it is something where our members have outlined 6 focus areas where they think they can really move the needle to create a more racially equitable sector and world. And so we feel fortunate that we have a source of funding that will allow us to do that, even as some of the funding sources and energy that we saw around that in 2021 and beyond are, perhaps waning a bit. we don't want to let up on this work. And so we know that we'll use this in part to support that continued focus. The rest, we are still developing our plan on, but I expect that we'll be doing some investment around health and housing, as well as around sort of our core work of just affordable housing and housing stability. One of the things we haven't talked about is SAHF's members were out front and early adopters on the White House's Resident-Centered Management Challenge and made some really bold commitments around housing stability for their residents. And that really gets to the intersection of the supply of affordable housing, subsidies for those who most need them, as well as services and practices that are truly resident-centered. What we're seeing right now is there are still a number of folks that have large rent arrearages, even after emergency rental assistance, because they were in a tenuous place to begin with. That's having very real impacts together with rising interest rates, staffing challenges, and inflation and higher costs in general. It's having real impacts for nonprofit housing providers who have really stood by residents and tried not to displace anyone, tried not to raise rents unless absolutely necessary. But that sort of finding that sustainable place of housing stability for residents, but housing stock stability for the larger community and for the mission-driven organizations that provide those resident-centered homes will continue to be part of our focus. So again, looking at how you pay for those services and practices that are resident-centered will be part of our research, practice, and policy advocacy with these funds as well.
In practice, what are some of those 6 areas you talked about? Like, how does that look as it rolls out? I understand the policy side of it or the goal of the initiative, but what would it look like in practice for those equitable objectives?
The 6 areas are board leadership commitment and transparency, people and culture, resident experience, contracting and spending, real estate investment, and policy. In practice, they all bump into one another. But board commitment and transparency, board leadership commitment and transparency really says, look, you can hire a DEI person, you can issue nice public statements, but unless your senior leadership team and your board is very committed to the work of advancing racial equity and becoming a more equitable organization and has transparency on how they're doing on that, it's not going to sustain, right? It'll be another talking point. And so that is really, it begins with the pledge itself. Each of our members took this back to their organization and considered what action they needed to take to adopt it and to move forward. And they're all at a different place in this journey. Part of that commitment and transparency is that each year we are looking at how to track and monitor and report to our board progress, and will eventually ourselves become more transparent about that. We are working now on a build out of a piece of our website to share resources. The next piece is people and culture. So how you build the organizations of people that are committed to advancing this work and creating more opportunities for people of color. This is not really new work for SAHF members. Our 2019-ish strategic plan had a piece that was really about advancing racial diversity, very specifically in the finance and real estate development part of our organizations. We looked around and said, look, this is a lot better than it used to be. We have become more aware of the need to be not only more diverse, but also places of inclusion and belonging. We really welcome folks to not just show up, but show up as who they are with all of their different talents and life experiences and really bring those to strengthen our organization. So that's a lot of sharing about how people are recruiting, retaining, creating places of belonging and giving employees ways to offer feedback so that things can improve and experiences really strengthen organizations and help build careers. The piece around contracting and spending is about not only kind of MBE spending requirements on building a project, but thinking about what is your economic impact as a housing provider writ large. The lawyers, the accountants, the caterers that you use for events, as well as your contractors and suppliers. How do you think not only about where your dollars go, but how you're holding your partners accountable and inviting them into a conversation about how we share the economic benefits and power created by our work. Real estate investment is maybe the hardest, but the most important piece. What do we build? For whom? With what money? Who are our partners? What voice do residents and the surrounding community have in what we're creating? And really, how is it owned? Do residents and communities benefit from what we create? We don't want to be extractive. That's for too long been the practice of affordable rental housing. Many of our members are thinking about how affordable housing can be used as a platform for building assets or wealth. and how it can remain sort of long-term in the community. Our members are long-term owners, but how do they ensure that sort of no matter what, the community continues to have a voice? The resident experience is you can have an affordable home and it can be run by an organization with a great diverse staff. But if you have not really thought about what it means to be person-centered, trauma-informed, and racially equitable in how you operate every part of that property, the resident and even the frontline staff can still experience discrimination and systemic barriers to really benefiting from and having a positive experience there. So thinking about everything from what are our policies for qualifying people to units to what does the lease-up process look like? How do we communicate around rent payment and inspections, non-payment of rent when it happens? And what does that really look like from the day you come in to apply to the day after you move out and are asked how it went? And then the policy piece is really thinking about what are the policies that we advocate for and how do they need to look different if we are being truly equitable. And this is a challenge because it sometimes means that the most equitable approach to things may not be the thing that is in the absolute most beneficial to the SAHF members. And so it's a place where we are still challenging ourselves and also saying, look, if we have the voices of these large housing providers, what are the other voices and perspectives of residents and communities where we should be lending support? And saying, look, this is a good idea, even if it's not something that we would traditionally have thought of as squarely in our wheelhouse or even 100% what we would do, that we need to listen to the people and communities where we work.
You provided some great practical ways for properties to assess themselves. And really, as we are all trying to learn and continue in that journey. So thank you for sharing some of those. I think having some real meat there helps everybody who is in this journey. So thank you for that. Speaking of another topic here, describe what the CORS certification is and what that process looks like.
Thank you for asking that. So CORS is Certified Organization for Resident Engagement and Services. This is a certification program that is run out of SAHF and grows out of our long-term commitment to enhancing housing with services. Back in 2015 or so, we started a community of practice for our members and other partners within the sector, looking at what does it mean to really have this enterprise commitment. We know that properties perform better, residents have better experiences, communities have better experiences when affordable housing properties are enhanced with services. Too often we've seen, I saw in my sort of earlier parts of my career, properties where you'd have this great on-site service coordinator, and then he or she would go to grad school, take a new job, move out of the area, and the program falls apart. And so the question really was, what's the enterprise level commitment and systems to services that says that, those good benefits will continue? And what does that system look like so that a policymaker, a funder, a local government, a community can be comfortable that if, say, Mercy Housing comes to town and says, we're going to buy this property and enhance it with services, they can believe that. Because the challenge of our policymakers and our funders and our partners, in community are, there's nothing there yet when you're asking them for money or for approvals. There's just faith. And so what does that systems approach look like? So how can we as practitioners invest in that system? And how can we demonstrate to our partners that those systems are in place and that we will, in a resident-centered way, deliver those services that we're talking about? And so CORS is the outgrowth of that sort of working with a community of practice. We, a few years later, worked with Fannie Mae, who had that interest of saying, look, we believe this. We think enhancing housing with services is a good idea, but how do we identify these groups? And so the CORS process looks at the organization, not an individual property, and it looks at the systems that you have in place, your staffing models, the infrastructure with IT, your funding models, as well as your practices around assessing the residents and communities, what the residents need and want, and what the community already has to offer. So it's looking both at corporate practices and then what you are doing at the property level to assess, deliver, and then continue to assess, to monitor the progress of programs and services and refine as needed. So it's sort of two little flowcharts, one at the corporate level and one at the property level, that are part of thinking about and understanding how an organization commits. So we're at north of 65 certified organizations now, I believe. So not just SAHF members, organizations of a variety of sizes. It is intended, obviously, it's an enterprise level certification. So typically for groups that own more than one property, but we have some that own just a few to some that own several hundred properties, housing authorities, nonprofits, for-profits all over the country. And we're seeing this be a useful tool as well for state housing finance agencies. About a half a dozen housing finance agencies reference cores in their QAPs, and it plays out differently in each, but generally as a way of demonstrating your capacity, again, to deliver those services, as well as in the Fannie Mae Healthy Housing Rewards Program. And we have a few other partners that in their lending and investing look for it as a way of sort of saying, okay, we understand that this capacity and this investment is here, and someone external has looked at it. And it's not just our staff validating it. We use panels of reviewers every time we go through an application that draw from the field.
I like it. It is really a nice added bonus to the industry. How did that get started?
So it really was, in all we do, we're really looking for practical solutions to create more homes enhanced by services that really give people better lives. And so we had been doing this work and building what we think of about our framework for a systems approach to resident services when my predecessor met with Fannie back in about 2017, 2018, to talk about what they were hoping to do to really provide some funding. And what they're able to do is provide a slight reduction in interest rate or a preference in interest rate for properties that are providing services. And that's evolved a little bit over time and how they think about that. But then what you can do with that savings is basically redirect it to provide for the cost of providing services. Because one of the biggest challenges we have is, well, we all sort of anecdotally know that, look, the property will perform better and certainly residents see better outcomes when you enhance an affordable home with services. There's not a consistent way to pay for it. There's not this funding source for service coordinators in most properties. In a very narrow subset of HUD properties, there's a grant program, but this year is the first time in many, many, many years that's even been open to any new properties. So in most places, we're looking for opportunities to fund it. So Fannie was looking to do that. In other places where you're competitively awarding resources, like state housing finance agencies, they're looking to say, look, we would really prefer and will, perhaps award more resources or award preference to properties that are going to find a way to do this. And so there it's a solution for more of a preference that we are out there advocating too, saying, look, we've really got to think about how we pay for these services too, and not just commit ourselves to providing them without a plan.
That's a good way to make sure it's sustainable and it keeps on going. So very, very good program. Well, we have talked about everything from healthcare to conservation, to resident engagement, to financing tools. Is there anything else you want to highlight for us?
I always feel like there's so much. Yeah, I think just that the core, it really is about stable homes and that housing stability work of how we are bringing folks in and financing housing in a way that allows rents to remain affordable and allows for the services and the management practices that help people remain stable. We've seen great success in things like the Family Self-Sufficiency Program and the assisted side that help people build some extra assets. Those service coordinators and a little bit of flexibility of the financing and help us leverage in other tools that let residents create their own breathing room and allow property operators to really be responsive and resident-centered when we do hit bumps in the road. SAHF members have seen great outcomes around housing stability for a number of years. Negative exits from our properties are less than half of what they are nationwide typically. And part of that is that deep commitment, but it does require some flexible tools for the many mission-driven organizations that are doing this work.
I've been talking with Andrea Ponsor, the president and CEO of the Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future, or SAHF. Andrea, thank you so much for taking the time, and we support you as you continue to champion the causes of affordable housing.
Thanks so much for having me, Katie.
Thanks for listening to Changemakers with Katie Gore. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.